Good evening, everyone. It is once again time for Bedtime Stories with Kaybe. I hope everyone is comfortable and ready to listen. This week, we'll be reading a story that is perhaps a little more familiar than some of the other stories we have read, and that is the story of Cinderella. Though this story is familiar to you, and you will know many of the beats of this tale, if you're familiar with most of the modern tellings, I must give a content warning. This is not the Disney version of Cinderella. There is dismemberment and injury in this one. You have been warned. With that out of the way, let us begin. Cinderella. There was once a rich man whose wife lay sick, and when she felt her end drawing near, she called to her only daughter to come near her bed and said, "Dear child, be good and pious, and God will always take care of you. And I will look down upon you from heaven, and will be with you." And then she closed her eyes and died. The maiden went every day to her mother's grave and wept, and was always pious and good. When the winter came, the snow covered the grave with a white covering, and when the sun came in the early spring and melted it away, the man took himself another wife. The new wife brought 2 daughters home with her, and they were beautiful and fair in appearance, but at heart were black and ugly. And then began very evil times for the poor stepdaughter. "Is the stupid creature to sit in the same room with us?" said they. "Those who eat food must earn it. She is nothing but a kitchen maid." They took away her pretty dresses, and put her in an old grey kirtle, and gave her wooden shoes to wear. "Just look now at the proud princess, how she is decked out," cried they, laughing. And then they sent her to the kitchen. There she was obliged to do heavy work from morning till night, get up early in the morning, draw water, make the fires, cook and wash. Besides that, the sisters did their utmost to torment her, mocking her, and stirring peas and lentils among the ashes and setting her to pick them up. In the evenings, when she was quite tired out with her hard day's work, she had no bed to lie on, but she was obliged to rest on the hearth among the cinders. And because she always looked dusty and dirty, as if she had slept in the cinders, they named her Cinderella. It happened one day that the father went to the fair, and he asked his 2 stepdaughters what he should bring back for them. "Fine clothes," said one. "Pearls and jewels," said the other. "But what will you have, Cinderella?" said he. "The first twig, father, that strikes against your hat on the way home. That is what I should like you to bring me." So he bought for the 2 stepdaughters fine clothes, pearls, and jewels. And on his way back, as he rode through a green lane, a hazel twig struck against his hat, and he broke it off and carried it home with him. And when he reached home, he gave to the stepdaughters what they had wished for. And to Cinderella he gave the hazel twig. She thanked him, and went to her mother's grave, and planted this twig there, weeping so bitterly that the tears fell upon it and watered it, and it flourished, and it became a fine tree. Cinderella went to see it 3 times a day, and wept and prayed, and each time a white bird rose up from the tree. And if she uttered any wish, the bird brought her whatever she had wished for. Now, it came to pass that the king ordained a festival that should last for 3 days, and to which all the beautiful young women of that country were bidden, so that the king's son might choose a bride from among them. When the 2 stepdaughters heard that they too were bidden to appear, they felt very pleased, and they called Cinderella and said, "Comb our hair, brush our shoes, and make our buckles fast. We are going to the wedding feast at the king's castle." When she heard this, Cinderella could not help crying, for she too would have liked to go to the dance, and she begged her stepmother to allow her. "What, you, Cinderella?" she said. "In all your dust and dirt, you want to go to the festival? You have no clothes and no shoes. You want to dance?" But, as she persisted in asking, her late stepmother said, "I have strewed a dishful of lentils in the ashes, and if you can pick them all up again in 2 hours, you may go with us." Then the maiden went to the back door that led to the garden and called out, "O gentle doves, O turtle doves, and all the birds that be, the lentils in the ashes lie, come and pick up for me. The good must be put in the dish, the bad you may eat if you wish." Then there came to the kitchen window 2 white doves, and after them some turtle doves, and at last a crowd of all the birds under heaven, chirping and fluttering, and they alighted among the ashes, and the doves nodded with their heads and began to pick, peck, pick, peck, and then all the others began to pick, peck, and put all the good grains into the dish. Before an hour was over, all was done, and they flew away. The maiden brought the dish to her stepmother, feeling joyful, and thinking that now she should go to the feast. But the stepmother said, "No, Cinderella, you have no proper clothes, and you do not know how to dance, and you would be laughed at." And when Cinderella cried for disappointment, she added, "If you could pick up 2 dishes full of lentils out of the ashes, nice and clean, you shall go with us." Thinking to herself, "For that is not possible," when she had strewed 2 dishes full of lentils among the ashes, the maiden went through the back door into the garden and cried, "O gentle doves, O turtle doves, and all the birds that be, the lentils that in the ashes lie, come and pick up for me. The good must be put in the dish, the bad you may eat if you wish." So there came to the kitchen window 2 white doves, and then some turtle doves, and at last a crowd of all the other birds under heaven, chirping and fluttering. And they alighted among the ashes, and the doves nodded with their heads, began to pick, peck, pick, peck. And then all the other birds began to pick, peck, and all put the good grains into the dish. And before half an hour was over, it was all done, and then they flew away. Then the maiden took the dishes to the stepmother, feeling joyful, and thinking that she should go with them to the feast. But she said, "All of this is no good to you. You cannot come with us, for you have no proper clothes, and cannot dance. You would put us to shame." Then she turned her back on poor Cinderella, and made haste to set out with her 2 proud daughters. And as there was no one left in the house, Cinderella went to her mother's grave under the hazel bush and cried, little tree, shake over me, that silver and gold may come down and cover me." Then the bird threw down a dress of gold and silver, and a pair of slippers embroidered with silk and silver. And in all haste she put on the dress and went to the festival. But her stepmothers and sisters did not know her, and thought she must be a foreign princess. She looked so beautiful in her golden dress. Of Cinderella they never thought at all, and supposed that she was sitting at home and picking the lentils out of the ashes. The king's son came to meet her, and took her by her hand, and danced with her, and he refused to stand up with anyone else, so that he might not be obliged to let go of her hand, and when anyone came to claim it, he answered, "She is my partner." And when the evening came, she wanted to go home, but the prince said he would go with her and take care of her, for he wanted to see where the beautiful maiden lived. But she escaped him, and jumped up into the pigeon house. Then the prince waited until the father came, and told him of the strange maiden that jumped into the pigeon house. And the father thought to himself, "It surely cannot be Cinderella." Called for axes and hatchets, and had the pigeon house cut down, but there was no one in it. And when they entered the house, there sat Cinderella in her dirty clothes, among the cinders, and a little oil lamp burnt dimly in the chimney. For Cinderella had been very quick, and had jumped out of the pigeon house again, and had run to the hazel bush, and there she had taken off her beautiful dress, and laid it on the grave, and the bird had carried it away again. And then she had put on her little grey dress again, and had sat down in the kitchen among the cinders. The next day, when the festival began anew, and the parents and stepsisters had gone to it, Cinderella went to the hazel bush, and cried, little tree, shake over me, that silver and gold may come down and cover me." Then the bird cast down a still more splendid dress than the day before, and when she appeared in it among the guests, everyone was astonished at her beauty. The prince had been waiting until she came, and he took her hand and danced with her alone. And when everyone else came to invite her, he said, "She is my partner." And when the evening came, she wanted to go home, and the prince followed her, for he wanted to see what house she belonged. But she broke away from him, and she ran into the garden at the back of the house. There stood a fine large tree, bearing splendid pears. She leapt as lightly as a squirrel among the branches, and the prince did not know what had become of her. So he waited until the father came, and then he told him that the strange maiden had rushed from him, and that he thought she had gone up into the pear tree. The father thought to himself, "It surely cannot be Cinderella." And he called for an axe, and felled the tree, but there was no one in it. And when they went to the kitchen, there sat Cinderella among the ashes, as usual, for she had gone down the other side of the tree, and had taken back her beautiful clothes to the bird on the hazel bush, and had put on her old grey clothes again. On the third day, when the parents and the stepchildren had set off, Cinderella went again to her mother's grave, and said to the tree, little tree, shake over me, that silver and gold may come down and cover me." Then the bird cast down a dress, the like of which had never been seen for splendor and brilliancy, and the slippers that were of gold. And when she appeared in this dress at the feast, nobody knew what to say for the wonderment. The prince danced with her alone, and if anyone else asked her, he answered, "She is my partner." And when it was evening, Cinderella wanted to go home, and the prince was about to go with her, when she ran past him so quickly that he could not follow her. But he had laid a plan, and had caused all the steps to be spread with pitch, so that as she rushed down them, the left shoe of the maiden remained sticking to it. The prince picked it up, and saw that it was of gold, and very small and slender. The next morning he went to the father, and told him that none should be his bride save for the one whose foot the golden shoe should fit. Then the two sisters were very glad, because they had pretty feet. The eldest went to her room to try on the shoe, and her mother stood by. but she could not get her great toe into it, for the shoe was too small. Then her mother handed her a knife, and said, "Cut the toe off, for when you are queen you will never have to go on foot." So the girl cut her toe off, squeezed her foot into the shoe, concealed the pain, and she went down to the prince. Then he took her with him, on his horse, as his bride, and rode off. They had to pass by the grave, and there sat 2 pigeons on the hazel bush, and cried, "There they go, there they go, there is blood on her shoe, the shoe is too small, not the right bride at all." Then the prince looked at her shoe, and saw the blood flowing, and he turned his horse round, and took the false bride home again, saying she was not the right one, and that the other sister must try on the shoe. So she went in her room to do so, and got her toes comfortably in, but her heel was too large. Then her mother handed her the knife. Cut off a piece of your heel. When you are queen, you will never have to go on foot." So the girl cut a piece off of her heel, and thrust her foot into the shoe, concealed the pain, and went down to the prince, who took his bride before him on his horse and rode off. When they passed by the hazel bush, the 2 pigeons sat there and cried, "There they go, there they go. There is blood on her shoe, the shoe is too small, not the right bride at all." Then the prince looked at her foot, and saw how the blood was flowing from the shoe, and stained the white stocking. And he turned his horse round, and brought the false bride home again. "This is not the right one. Have you no other daughter?" "No," said the man. "Only my dead wife left behind her a little stunted Cinderella. It is impossible that she can be the bride." But the king's son ordered for her to be sent for. But the mother said, "Oh no, she is much too dirty. I could not let her be seen." But he would have her fetched, and so Cinderella had to appear. First she washed her face and hands quite clean, and went in and curtsied to the prince, who held out to her the golden shoe. Then she sat down on a stool, drew her foot out of the heavy wooden shoe, and slipped it into the golden one, which fitted it perfectly. And when she stood up, the prince looked her in the face, and he knew again the beautiful maiden that had danced with him, and he cried, "This is the right bride." The stepmother and the 2 sisters were thunderstruck, and grew pale with anger. But he put Cinderella before him on his horse and rode off, and as they passed the hazel bush, the 2 white pigeons cried, there they go, no blood on her shoe. The shoe's not too small, the right bride she is after all." And when they had thus cried, they came flying after, and perched on Cinderella's shoulders, one on the right and the other on the left, and so remained. And when her wedding with the prince was appointed to be held, the false sisters came, hoping to curry favor, and take part in the festivals. So the bridal procession went to the church. The eldest walked on the right side, and the younger on the left, and the pigeons picked out an eye of each of them. And as they returned, the elder was on the left side, and the younger was on the right, and the pigeons picked out the other eye of each of them. And so they were condemned to go blind for the rest of their days, because of their wickedness and falsehood. And that is the end of the story of Cinderella. The next story is only a few pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages. Alright. Let us do one more story tonight after all. The next story is called The Devil's 3 Gold Hairs. We shall read this story, and then we must go to bed. The Devil's 3 Gold Hairs. Once there was a very poor woman who was delighted when her son was born with a caul enveloping his head. This was supposed to bring good fortune, and he was predicted that he would marry the king's daughter when he became 19. Soon after, a king came to the village, but no one knew that it was the king. When he asked for news, they told him that a few days before a child had been born in the village, and it was prophesied that he would be very lucky. Indeed, it had been said that in his 19th year he would have the king's daughter for a wife. The king, who had a wicked heart, was very angry when he heard this. But he went to the parents in a most friendly manner, and said to them kindly, "Good people, give up your child to me. I will take greatest care of him." At first they refused, but when the stranger offered them a large amount of gold, and then mentioned that if their child was born to be lucky, everything must turn out the best for him, they willingly, at last, gave him up. The king placed the child in a box, and rode away with it for a long distance, till he came to deep water, into which he threw the box containing the child, saying to himself as he rode away, "From this unwelcome suitor, here I have saved my daughter." But the box did not sink. It swam like a boat on the water, and so high above it that not a drop got inside. It sailed on to a spot about 2 miles from the chief town of the king's dominions, where there were a mill and a weir, which it stopped, and on which it rested. The miller's man, who happened to be standing near the bank, fortunately noticed it, and thinking it would most likely contain something valuable, drew it onto the shore with a hook, but when he opened it, there lay a beautiful baby, who was quite awake and lively. He carried it to the miller and his wife, and as they had no children, they were quite delighted, and said heaven must have sent the little boy as a gift to them. They brought him up carefully, and he grew to manhood, clever and virtuous. It happened one day that the king was overtaken by a thunderstorm while passing near the mill, and stopped to ask for shelter. Noticing the youth, he asked the miller if the tall young man was his son. "No," he replied. "He is a foundling. 19 years ago, a box was seen sailing on the mill stream out by one of our men, and when it was caught, he drew it out of the water and found the child in it." Then the king knew that this must be the child of fortune, that therefore the one which he had thrown into the water. He hid his vexation, however, and presently said kindly, "I want to send a letter to the queen, my wife. If that young man will take it to her, I will give him 2 gold pieces for his trouble." "We are at the king's service," replied the miller, and called to the young man to prepare for his errand. Then the king wrote a letter to the queen containing these words: "As soon as the boy who brings this letter arrives, let him be killed, and I shall expect to find him dead and buried when I come back." The youth was soon on his way with this letter. He lost himself, however, in a large forest. But when the darkness came, he saw in the distance a glimmering light, which he walked to, and found a small house. He entered, and saw an old woman lying by the fire, quite alone. She appeared frightened when she saw him, and said, "Where do you come from? What do you want?" "I am come from the mill," he replied. "I am carrying a letter to the wife of the king, and as I have lost my way, I should like very much to stay here during the night." "You poor man," she replied. "You are in a den of robbers, and when they come home, they may kill you." "They may come when they like. I am not afraid. But I am so tired that I cannot go a step farther." Then he stretched himself on the bench and fell fast asleep. Soon after, the robbers came home, and asked angrily what the youth was lying there for. "Ah," said the old woman, "he is an innocent child who has lost himself in the wood, and I took him in out of compassion. He's carrying a letter to the queen which the king has sent." Then the robbers went softly to the sleeping youth, took the letter from his pocket, and read it in it that as soon as the bearer arrived at the palace he was to lose his life. Then pity arose in the hard-hearted robbers, and their chief tore up the letter and wrote another, in which it was stated that as soon as the boy arrived, he should be married to the king's daughter. Then they left him to lie and rest on the bench till the next morning. And when he awoke, they gave him the letter, and showed him the road he was to take. As soon as he reached the palace, and set in the letter, the queen read it, and she acted in exact accordance with what was written, ordering a grand marriage feast, and had the princess married at once to the fortunate youth. He was very handsome and amiable, so that the king's daughter soon learned to love him very much, and was quite happy with him. Not long after, when the king returned home to his castle, he found the prophecy respecting the child of fortune fulfilled, and that he was married to a king's daughter. "How has this happened?" said he, "for I have in my letter given very different orders." Then the queen gave him the letter and said, "You may see for yourself what is stated there." The king read the letter, and saw very clearly that it was not the one he had written. He asked the youth what he had done with the letter he had entrusted to him, and where he had brought the other from. I know not," he replied, "unless it was changed during the night when I slept in the forest." Full of wrath, the king said, "You shall not get off so easily, for whomever marries my daughter must first bring me 3 golden hairs from the head of the demon of the Black Forest. If you bring them to me before long, then you shall keep my daughter as a wife, but not otherwise." Then the child of fortune said, "I will fetch these golden hairs very quickly. I am not the least afraid of the demon." Thereupon he said farewell, and started on his travels. His way led him to a large city, and as he stood at the gate and asked admission, a watchman said to him, "What trade do you follow, and how much do you know?" "I know everything," he replied. "Then you can do us a favor," answered the watchman. "If you can tell why our master's fountain, from which wine used to flow, is dried up and never gives even water now." "I know everything," he answered. "Then," said the watchman, "you can do us a favor, and tell us why a tree in our town, which once bore golden apples, now only produces leaves." "Wait till I return," he replied, "and I will tell you." On he went again, and he came to a broad river, over which he must pass in a ferry-boat, and the ferryman asked him the same question about his trade and his knowledge. He gave the same reply, that he knew everything. "Then," said the man, "you can do me a favor, and tell me how it is that I am obliged to go backwards and forward in my ferry-boat every day without a change of any kind." "Wait till I come back," he replied. "Then you shall know all about it." As soon as he reached the other side of the water, he found the entrance to the Black Forest, in which was the Demon's Cove. It was very dark and gloomy, and the demon was not at home, but his old mother was sitting in a large armchair, and she looked up and said, "What do you want? You don't look wicked enough to be one of us." "I just want 3 golden hairs from the demon's head," he replied. "Otherwise my wife will be taken away from me." "That is asking a great deal," she replied. "For if the demon comes home and finds you here, he will have no mercy on you. However, if you will trust me, I will try to help you." And then she turned him into an ant and said, "Creep into the folds of my gown, and there you will be safe." Yes, he replied. That is all very good, but I have 3 things besides that I want to know. First, why a well, from which formerly wine used to flow, should be dry now, so that not even water can be got from it. Secondly, why a tree that once bore golden apples should now produce nothing but leaves. And thirdly, why a ferryman is obliged to roll forward and backwards every day without ever leaving off. These are difficult questions, said the old woman. But keep still and quiet, and when the demon comes in, pay great attention to what he says, while I pull the golden hairs out of his head. Late in the evening, the demon came home, and as soon as he entered, he declared that the air was not clear. I smell the flesh of a man, he said, and I am sure that there is someone here. So he peeped into all the corners, and searched everywhere, but could find nothing. Then his old mother scolded him and said, Just as I have been sweeping and dusting and putting everything in order, then you must come home and give me all the work to do over again. You have always the smell of something in your nose. Do sit down and eat your supper. The demon did as she told him. And when he had eaten and drunk enough, he complained of being tired. So his mother made him lie down so that she could place his head on her lap, and he was soon so comfortable that he fell fast asleep and snored. Then the old woman lifted up a golden hair and twitched it out and laid it by his side. "Oh!" screamed the demon, waking up. "What was that for?" "I have had a bad dream," answered she, "and it made me catch hold of your hair." "What did you dream about?" asked the demon. "Oh, I dreamed of a well in a marketplace from which wine once used to flow, but now it is dried up, and they can't even get water from it. Whose fault is that?" "Ah, they ought to know that there sits a toad under the stone in the well, and if he were dead, the wine would flow again." Then the old woman combed his hair again, till he slept and snored so loud that the windows rattled, and she pulled out a second hair. "What are you about now?" asked the demon in a rage. "Oh, don't be angry," said the woman. "I've had another dream." "What was this dream about?" he asked. "Why, I dreamed that in a certain country there grows a fruit tree which used to bear golden fruit, but now it produces nothing but leaves. What is the cause of this?" "Why don't they know," answered the demon, "that there is a mouse gnawing on the root? Were it dead, the tree would again bear golden apples. And if it gnaws much longer, the tree will wither and dry up. Bother your dreams! If you disturb me again, just as I am comfortably asleep, you will have a box on the ear." Then the old woman spoke kindly to him, and smoothed and combed his hair again, till he slept and snored. Then she seized the third golden hair and pulled it out. The demon on this sprang to his feet, roared out in a greater rage than ever, and would have done some mischief in the house, but she managed to appease him this time also, and he said, How, and she said, "How can I help my bad dreams?" "And whatever did you dream?" he asked, with some curiosity. "Well, I dreamed about a ferryman, who complains that he is obliged to take people across the river and is never free." "Oh, the stupid fellow," replied the wizard. "He can very easily ask any person who wants to be ferried over to take the oar in his hand, and he will be free at once." Then the demon laid his head down once more. As the old woman had pulled out the 3 golden hairs, and had gotten answers to all the 3 questions, she let the old fellow rest and sleep in peace until morning dawned. As soon as he had gone out next day, the old woman took the ant from the folds of her dress, and restored the lucky youth to his former shape. "Here are the 3 golden hairs for which you asked," said she. "And did you hear all the answers to your 3 questions?" "Yes," he replied, "every word, and I will not forget them." "Well, then, I have helped you out for your difficulties, and now get home as fast as you can." After thanking the old woman for her kindness, he turned his steps homeward, full of joy that everything had succeeded so well. When he arrived at the ferry, the man asked for the promised answer. "Ferry me over first," he said, "then I will tell you." So when they reached the other side, he gave the ferryman the demon's advice, that the next person who came and wished to be ferried over should have the oar placed in his hand, and from that moment he would have to take the ferryman's place. Then the youth journeyed on till he came to a town where the unfruitful tree grew, and where the watchman was waiting for his answer. To him the young man repeated what he had heard, and said, "Kill the mouse that is gnawing on the root. Then will your tree again bear golden apples." The watchman thanked him, and gave him in return for his information 2 asses laden with gold, which were led after him. He very soon arrived at the city which contained the dried-up fountain. The sentinel came forward to receive his answer. Said the youth, "Under a stone in the fountain sits a toad. It must be searched for and killed. Then will wine flow from it." To show how thankful he was for the advice, the sentinel also ordered 2 asses laden with gold to be sent after him. At length, the child of fortune reached home with his riches, and his wife was overjoyed at seeing him again, and hearing how well he had succeeded in his undertaking. He placed before the king 3 golden hairs, which he had brought from the head of the black demon, and when the king saw these and the 4 asses laden with gold, he was quite satisfied and said, "Now that you have performed all the required conditions, I am quite ready to sanction your marriage to my daughter. But, my dear son-in-law, tell me, how you obtained all this gold? It is indeed a very valuable treasure. Where did you find it?" "I crossed the river in a ferry boat, and on the opposite shore I found the gold lying in the sand." "Can I find some if I go?" asked the king eagerly. "Yes, as much as you please," he replied. "There is a ferryman there who will row you over, and you can fill your sack in no time." The greedy old king went out on his journey in all haste, and when he came near the river, he beckoned to the ferryman to row him over the ferry. The old man told him to step in, and just as they reached the opposite shore, he placed the rudder oar in the king's hand, and sprang out of the boat. And so the king became a ferryman as punishment for his sins. I wonder if he still goes on ferrying people over the river. It is very likely, for no one has ever been persuaded to touch the oar since he took it. And that is the end of The Devil's 3 Golden Hairs. And that will be the end of our bedtime stories for this week. Next week, we'll be reading Hansel and Gretel, another classic, and it looks like also The 3 Feathers, which is the story I'm not familiar with. But with that, it is time for bed. I hope you've enjoyed your bedtime stories. Good night, everyone. Sleep well, and pleasant dreams.